Jesus is proceeding. He had left in John chapter 17. We have the high priestly prayer, right? And then he's walking to the Garden of Gethsemane, the Mount of Olives, and he is walking with his disciples and he's teaching them. Remember, you have the vine, the true vine story, and the vine and the vine dresser, and if you are the branches, and he's walking with them. He then is walking with them. He does the high priestly prayer in John 17, where he prays to the Father on behalf of the disciples. And now he's walking to the Mount of Olives to a location called Gethsemane. Gethsemane means olive press or oil press. In Luke's gospel, it says that this was his custom, to go to the Mount of Olives, to go to the Garden of Gethsemane and to pray. And this was his custom. This is not the only time that Christ prayed here. It was his custom. He prayed often. We see all throughout the scriptures that he prayed. And I want us to take this moment into consideration, right? I don't want to just read this text, but taking into the context of where we're going, Jesus is at the hour. Right, he is at the hour before he is betrayed into the hands of sinners and going to face his death. This is his hour. I don't know about you, but if you were at the brink of your most tested moment about to happen, what would you be doing? And Jesus, as was his custom. See, we have here, we know, right, in the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus goes and prays to the Father, and we know this. But I want us to think for a second. This wasn't the first time. This was his custom. It wasn't like he was at the door of testing, and he decided now to pray. We have this big moment coming up. The biggest test of my life. Now, therefore, I'm going to pray. That's not what happened. Jesus had a custom of doing this. It was a part of his daily life. He prayed and communed with the Father. And it wasn't like he prayed and communed with the Father on a routine basis and that then came the hour of testing and he found something different to do. No, he continued on in prayer. He continued on what was his custom. This moment in the earthly life of Christ is right now, where we see in this story, is at the door. Is at the door of the testing that he came here to do. The success of the mission of what he came here to do is at the brink of this moment. It hinges on how he responds to what's in front of him. Him walking through rejection, mockery, beatings, torture, the crucifixion, the bearing of the wrath of God is at this moment. And how does he prepare himself? He does what he always did, what was his custom to do. He communed with the Father. He communed with him. So let's look at Matthew 26, verse 36. Then Jesus came with them to a place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. And I want to skip back over to where he comes back to the disciples in verse 40. Then he came to the disciples and found them sleeping and said to Peter, "What, could you not watch with me for 1 hour? Watch and pray." Why? Watch and pray lest you enter into temptation. The spirit is indeed willing, but the flesh is weak. Why was he calling the disciples to pray? Because there was a testing for them. Will they flee? Will they run? What will happen when the pressure happens? When the pressure starts to cook? When you get the world shaking at you, what's going to spill out? And he said, hey, watch and pray that when you enter in, that you may not enter into temptation. They may not enter into temptation. And Jesus, in like manner, went and prayed, setting the example for them that he would not be given over to temptation, right? Jesus had to walk sinlessly through this whole thing. that he would not be tempted to, with all the authority he had, to skip out on this moment, to retaliate, to glorify God to the fullest. He wanted to be completely submitted to the will of the Father, and what he did was he prayed. And I think that's something that we need to take into account. The two longest prayers we have recorded in Jesus' life, not when he taught the disciples how to pray, but him praying himself, is in this last day, these last moments. John 17, when he prays to the Father, and then now in the Garden of Gethsemane. And that should be something we take to heart. In this moment, we see the two longest recorded prayers in Jesus' ministry, and that should say something to us about prayer. How much it's needed to not enter into temptation. How much is needed to continue on with the mission that God has called us to. So if you want to write a point down, we find strength in prayer to overcome. We find strength in prayer to overcome. And I want us to see this in the life of Christ here in the Garden of Gethsemane. So I'm gonna try to, for you guys, connect a couple different passages together. I want us to hear from the different Gospels and get a fuller picture of what's happening here in the garden. So you guys can stay in Matthew 26. I'm going to be jumping around. I'm going to be going over to Mark and also into Luke to give you a fuller picture. So let's look back in verse 36. And Jesus came with them to the place called Gethsemane and said to the disciples, "Sit here while I go and pray over there." And he took with him Peter and the two sons of Zebedee, and he began to be sorrowful and deeply distressed. Then he said to them, "My soul is exceedingly sorrowful, even to death. Stay and watch with me." Why was he exceedingly sorrowful? Why was he, even to the point of death, why was he so grieved and deeply moved? Well, he knew what was about to happen. Later on in the passage, he says, "Let this cup pass from me." And what is in the cup? What is in the cup for him? In the Old Testament, all throughout the Old Testament, the cup is referred to as the wrath of the Father, the wrath of God. I'm going to read to you a passage in Isaiah 51:17. 51:17 and verse 22. It says, wake yourself, stand up, O Jerusalem. You who have drunk from the hand of the Lord the cup of his wrath, who have drunk to the dregs the bowl, the cup of staggering, the cup of wrath." This is what the cup that Christ would need to drink himself, the cup of the Father's wrath. In verse 22 it says, "Thus says your Lord, the Lord, your God, who pleads the cause of his people, behold, I have taken from your hand the cup of staggering, the cup of wrath, the bowl of my wrath, and you shall drink it no more." And who drank it? Christ drank it to its full. Not just for the sins of the people of Israel, but for the sins of the world poured out upon Christ. He bore our sins upon the cross. And in this moment in the garden, he would drink the full cup of the wrath of God. In this moment in the garden, he's knowing that he's about to go drink the full cup of the wrath of God. And he's praying. He has decided to pray to the Father. And he says, "I am deeply moved in my spirit. I'm sorrowful and deeply distressed. My soul is exceedingly sorrowful." In Mark's account of the gospel, he says he went a little further and fell on the ground after telling his disciples to sit and pray. And it said, and he prayed that if it were possible, the hour might pass from him. This hour, right? He's at the moment of the brink, the hour of the greatest testing of his life. And he decides to get on his knees and call out to the Father. And he says, "O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will. O my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me." In Mark's account of the gospel, it says, "Abba, Father, all things are possible for you." So putting it together, Abba, Father, all things are possible for you. So if it is possible, All things are possible with you, but if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Let this cup pass from me. That I would not have to drink of your wrath, if it's possible. But Lord, I know that for this hour I came here, as it says in John 12, for this hour I have come. Should I say, let this hour pass from me? But for this hour I have come here. So he knew what he was there to do. But to take upon for himself the wrath of the Father. Can you imagine? In John 17, it speaks of the high priestly prayer, the relationship of Jesus and the Son, the relationship of Jesus and the Father. And he's praying to the Father and said, Lord, for the people, for my disciples, I want them to be one like we are one. I want them to have oneness like we are one. The Father and the Son, eternally one, forever. Can you imagine? There was always love given. This perfect unity, this perfect love, this perfect relationship, this perfect honoring, this oneness. And marriage doesn't even come close to the oneness that was there between the Father and the Son. This triune God. There's such a oneness, such a joy, such a love there. And for the first time, the Son would experience not love, but wrath. For the first time, the Son would take upon himself that it would please the Father to crush him for our sins. Not like the Son was unwilling. He came to the earth for this purpose, to glorify the Father and for us to be made one with him. Oh, the love he has for the Father, and oh, the love that he has for us, willing then to drink the full cup of the wrath of God on our behalf. Oh, Christ was willing. He knew what he was coming for. And he knew what he was coming to do. And he knew what he had to do, drinking the full cup. And when he was at the moment when the bitterness of this cup was at his lips, he could taste it. What does he do? He cries out to the Father for strength. I'm here to do your will, oh my Father. If it's possible, all things are possible. I don't want to drink the cup of your wrath, but if this is your will be done. And I know we read sometimes in the Gospels, and I want us to see what happens here in Jesus' prayer. We read in Mark's account, it says he goes away and prays the same thing. Right? He goes and finds the disciples sleeping, and then he goes away and prays the same thing. That's not actually, it says in verse 39 of Mark's account of the gospel, it says, again he went away and prayed and spoke the same words or word. He spoke the same thing. But what is the same thing? If you look at Mark's account of the gospel in verse 35, in Mark 14, it says, he went a little further and fell on the ground and prayed that if it were possible, this hour might pass. So that's the main thing he was going to the Father for. If it be possible, let this hour pass. He kept going to the Father asking for this hour to pass, if it's possible. But he was there to submit himself to the will of the Father. But your will be done. Your will be done. As we found in the next account, when he goes to the Father again in Mark 26, he says, oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. Continuing to go to the Father and not just pleading, oh, just take it away, saying the same things, take it away, just take it away. Oh, my Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. He didn't say the same things, but in theme, he was saying the same thing. You can see it here in Matthew 26. If you look at Mark 14 and in Luke 22, he went away. The first time he said, my Father, if it is possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but your will be done. Look at the second time he says it in verse 42. Oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. It's not the same thing in word for word, right? In theme, yes, but it's not the same thing. What happened from the first time he prayed to the second time he prayed? Was there any change? Did anything happen that strengthened him? If you want to turn there, you can turn there in Luke 22. In verse 39, it's this account of the garden prayer. In verse 41, he says, he went, speaking of Jesus, he was withdrawn from about a stone's throw away from the disciples. He knelt down and prayed, saying, Father, if it is your will, take this cup away from me. Nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done, like we read in the first part here in Matthew 26. Then it says in verse 43 in Luke 22, then an angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. So what happens? He goes to the Father and prays. I do not want to drink your wrath. I know I've come here. I don't want to see that relationship separated. But Lord, if this is your will, if there's no other way, I will do it. Let your will be done. And he's submitting himself to the Father, and the Father doesn't take away the cup. No, son. This is what you'll have to do. No, son, there is no other way. No, son, you will drink the full wrath, my full wrath upon you for the redemption of mankind and for the glory of my name. No, son, there is no other way. But I will strengthen you. I will meet with you. I will uphold you. I'll lift you up and build you up for this moment of testing. And he sent him an angel. An angel appeared to him from heaven, strengthening him. I want us to see that. So the second time he then goes to the Father again, it's not the same thing. He says, oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away, which he had just learned from the Father by him sending the angel to strengthen him for this very moment. He knew this cup was not going to pass away. So he says, oh, my Father, if this cup cannot pass away from me unless I drink it, your will be done. You see the submission of the Son to the Father and being strengthened by the Father for this task. You see there is power in prayer. We find strength in prayer to overcome. You see how God met Christ and didn't take him out of your circumstance, but met him in this circumstance to strengthen him for what his will was. And Jesus was able to receive it because he was there in order to do the will of the Father. Father, you know the task before me. You know what I must do. I don't want that separation between me and you, but if this is the only way, I will do your will, and the Father strengthens him. You see, it's not that there is power in prayer. Hold on. Not that there's power in prayer. There is. But the power comes from who you're praying to. There isn't just power in prayer. The power, the strength is in God himself, who we are praying to. Going before the Father, asking him for help, submitting our wills to his. And what his will is best for us. And it looked for Christ, death. And taking upon himself the wrath of us all. And the Father strengthened him for the task. So that the next time he goes to the Father in prayer, he is more fully submitted and ready for the task. And he came again in verse 42 of Matthew 26 and found the disciples sleeping again. And then he went away again, it says in verse 44, and prayed the third time. In Luke 22, it says he prayed more earnestly, being in agony, that his sweat became like great drops of blood falling down to the ground. This wasn't an easy task, but he was accepting the will of the Father. I think we need to think about the moment of testing that we find ourselves in. What do we resort to? Do we believe as we sit in prayer that the Father will answer our prayers? Because he does. He did it for his Son, and he will do it for you. In John 17, he says, he prays to the Father that the love that the Father has for the Son, that we would experience the same love. In the redemption that was bought for us after this Garden of Gethsemane moment allows you to have the same relationship with the Father, to be bestowed upon you. The love that the Father had for the Son is now be given to you. Do you feel that you would be found any less able to receive from the Father if you go and pray? And Jesus found the strength to do what he was called to do because he prayed. We find strength in prayer to overcome. In Hebrews 4:14, seeing then that we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus, the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weakness, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. He succeeded in the mission he came for. Let us, therefore, come boldly to the throne of grace because of Christ, that we may obtain mercy and find grace to help in time of need. See, there is power in prayer because God is the one who hears us in our prayers and will strengthen us. And Jesus here found strength to carry on the mission he was called to. Even though the disciples did not continue on in prayer, we know what happened to them because they did not pray. They fell into temptation. When Jesus was handed over to his betrayers, they scattered and fled from him. But Jesus remained a part of his mission. I want you to see the strength that Jesus has. In John 18, as the betrayers come for Jesus, it says in verse 4 of John 18, Jesus, therefore, knowing all things that were coming upon him, after he finished praying, he said to his disciples, behold, the hour is at hand. It's here. The Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of sinners. Rise, let us go. He says, knowing that all things that were about to come upon him, went forward and said to his betrayers, whom are you seeking? They answered him, saying, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said to them, I am he. Can you imagine the strength, knowing what's about to come? That you're given over to your betrayers. Not only are you going to experience the full cup of the wrath of God upon yourself for the deliverance of mankind, but you would be tortured, mocked by your own people that you created, tortured and crucified. He gets up and he's like, my hour's here. And he goes to his betrayers and said, whom are you seeking? You see the strength and the confidence in Christ that came out of his moment of prayer. Yes, I know we know God the Son. We're like, okay, well, it was Jesus, of course. But as the man, we saw where he gets his strength from going to the Father. And you see the confidence that he rises up and he says, whom are you seeking? I am he. And Judas, who betrayed him, and also stood with them, the crowd that was here for them. And when he said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. Can you imagine that moment? He steps out in confidence, expecting anyone else that when they were there to capture him, that he would run from this moment, and he steps into the moment, confident, knowing the strength that the Father has provided for him, that he must accomplish it, and walked forward in confidence, that they fell back themselves. And again, he asked in verse 7, I just love this, so excuse me for going into detail, I just love this moment. They fell to the ground, and verse 7 says, then he asked them again, whom are you seeking? And they said, Jesus of Nazareth. And Jesus said in verse 8, Jesus answered, I have told you that I am he. Therefore, if you seek me, let these go their way. Speaking of his disciples, let them go. And we look back in Matthew 26 in this moment. He speaks to Peter, who ends up whipping out his sword, thinking he was going to save the day, and cuts off a guy's ear. Like, you have a horrible aim. Like, you're striking someone, you just get an ear. Like, you completely missed. And Jesus says, then put your sword in its place, for all who take the sword will perish by the sword. Or do you think that I cannot pray to my Father? Verse 53. And he will provide for me more than 12 legions of angels. 12 legions of angels. How then could the scriptures be fulfilled that this must happen this way? He's like, in full authority, telling them that he is the one they're looking for. Let them go. And Peter tries to accomplish something. He's like, put your sword away. Don't you think I can pray to the Father? And he would send 12 legions of angels, about 72,000 angels. Do you think I can call on my Father and get an army here in a moment? Do I need your sword? I have the power to do this. And he said, but in order for the scriptures to be fulfilled, I am here for this hour. I will take it. Put your sword away. You see the confidence that came out of the moment of Garden of Gethsemane when he went to the Father and prayed. He knew his hour was here, and he dropped to his knees. And the Lord answered him. So, church, I want us to see that there is power in prayer, and even the Son of Man went to this moment. I want us to see what came out of it. I want to see that the Lord does answer prayer and strengthen him. I also want you to see, in closing, a small caveat that I think is not seen in this passage, but when Jesus goes to the garden, he also prays and is strengthened, but he also goes in the joy of the Lord as his strength, as an undergirding to this moment. I want us to miss that one thing that strengthened him beyond when he went to the Father in prayer. What strengthened Jesus as an undergirding throughout this whole mission, that he'll be able to endure this task, is joy. Christ's joy, Christ's delight, Christ's love for the Father and wanting to glorify him in his love for us. It says in Hebrews chapter 12, right, fixing your eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross. For the joy that was set before him. You know the verse in Nehemiah chapter 8, the joy of the Lord is our strength. So another part of the strength that Jesus had was from prayer and from the joy of the Lord. I want you to write the second point down. The joy of the Lord is our strength. We find strength in prayer, and we find strength in the Lord. It doesn't say the joy of the Lord, the joy in the Lord is our strength. The joy in the Lord is our strength. No, the joy of the Lord. Of the Lord himself being our joy. It was Christ's desire, his joy, that the desires of the Father would be fulfilled in him. He wanted the Father's desires. He wanted the will of the Father to be done in him. It was God the Father himself which he took delight in. And because God was his joy, what God wanted for him was his joy. And he found strength in it. In John 17, right, we learn about the abiding in the vine and the branches. And he wanted this oneness, and he said to the Father for his disciples that his joy may be full in us. His desire and his prayer was that his joy would be in us. The joy of the Son would be in us, which was in the Father, and that our joy would be made full. See, the Lord is full of joy. He is the epitome of joy and delight. He is joy-filled. He is love. And he's calling us to join into this joy with him. And Christ was able to endure a moment like this because he was completely at the disposal of his Father, because he desired the Father's joy in all things. He was his delight. Christ wanted the Father to be glorified. And because his heart was wrapped in the love of the Lord, the joy of the Lord, it was then his strength. So then how are we to walk in strength like this? You're like, man, I hear you. I know I am to pray, and I know that he should be my full delight, so that I would have a strength like Christ, a bold strength. Well, pray. Seek the Father. Ask him to fill you afresh with the Spirit, and submit yourself to his desires. I'll close with this one verse for your takeaway. Psalm 91 says, those who know your name, speaking of the Father, those who know your name, the name of God, his character, will put their trust in you. Those who know your name will put their trust in you. For you, Lord, have not forsaken your people. Those who know your name will put their trust in you. How will you grow in trust? To submit your life to the Lord, to let him be your joy, to allow him to walk you into any moment that you would be able to say, Lord, not my will, but your will be done. To find strength to move forward, grow in the knowledge of his name. When you know his name, you will put your trust in him. Christ knew the Father fully, therefore was able to submit his entire life to the Father, and it glorified him. And he drank the cup on our behalf, and it glorified him, and he entered into the joy of the Father. And it says in Psalm 16, you will not leave my soul to Sheol, nor will you allow your Holy One to see corruption. You will show me the path of life, and in your presence is fullness of joy. And at your right hand are pleasures forevermore. And Christ walked into that fullness. And he's inviting us to be able to experience that fullness as well.